There's a really good line in one of Jay-Z's songs where he says you can make the Yankee hat more famous than a Yankee can.
Listen, he stands for culture. And that was one of the reasons why Roc Nation was so appealing to me. We're more of a movement than we are an agency.
It's one thing, I guess, to say, speak to an athlete, find out what brands are in their life. It's another thing to be able to then go and have meaningful conversations with those brands.
Vinicius Jr. is not just a football player. When I pitch Vini, I pitch more about what he represents off the pitch than what he represents on. Yes, the fact that he's the best player in the world opens up a door. But this man's an entrepreneur. He's a philanthropist. The way he stands up for racism, right? He's purpose-led. And that's what's going to engage a brand. I started every meeting before I went into our formal PowerPoint presentation with one question.
Hello and welcome to the Sports Pundit Podcast, the show exclusively for the people shaping the future of sport. Driven by my curiosity working within the industry, I started this show to host conversations with decision makers from the MLB to the ICC, unpacking their strategies and industry shaping ideas. On today's episode, I'm joined by Michael Yormark, president of Roc Nation Sports International, an agency representing the likes of Vinicius Jr, Kevin De Bruyne, Endrick and Siya Kolisi. Michael set up this division in 2019, moving to London with nothing but a suitcase and an alternative approach to representing athletes, particularly within European football. He's since expanded their presence to places like Italy, South Africa, and Brazil, and expanded their remit from football to also include rugby and netball. In this conversation, we discussed that journey, the influence of having an owner like Jay-Z, what it's like representing some of the biggest and most marketable athletes in the world, approaching new sports, and much, much more. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation with Michael Yormark. Thank you for coming on the Sports Pundit Podcast. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Where I like to start with every conversation is just to get a little bit of background on yourself and your journey. So can you just give a little bit of a walkthrough of how you went from sports industry executive all the way through to president of Roc Nation Sports International?
Sure. So I'm going to take you way back. When I was 13 years old, I knew exactly what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to get in the sports and entertainment industry. I wasn't quite sure about the entry point, but I knew that that's what I wanted to do for a living. Everything that I've done since I was 13 years old has been part of the plan, part of the blueprint for success. When I came out of graduate school, I went to Ohio University. I ultimately knew that I wanted to get on the sports side, the sports team side of the business. And my aspiration was to become one of the youngest president and CEOs of a major professional sports team in America. So every move that I made coming out of graduate school was with that in mind. I came out of graduate school. I did an internship at Madison Square Garden. I started my career on the media side of the industry, sports media side of the industry. I then had an opportunity to join the New York Yankees, which, as a kid growing up in New York and New Jersey was a dream come true. I went through the commercial side, the commercial sales side of that business. And then I think my first big break came when Wayne Huizenga, the late Wayne Huizenga, who owned the Dolphins, Marlins, and Florida Panthers in South Florida, called me and said, I want you to be part of our organization. I'm building a marketing company that will serve each of those three properties. I want you to come in as a vice president and move to South Florida. And that was a dream come true for me. That really started, my rise to where I am ultimately. I went into South Florida. I worked for those three teams. I then started the Columbus Blue Jackets of the National Hockey League in Columbus, Ohio. I also was involved in the building of the Nationwide Arena. From there, I went to the Tampa Bay Lightning in Tampa Bay, Florida, another team in the National Hockey League as their executive vice president and chief marketing officer. When I was there, I had the opportunity to win the Stanley Cup. And then I ventured back to South Florida and worked for the Florida Panthers as the CEO for 11 years prior to joining Roc Nation. My first role at Roc Nation back in 2014 was the president and chief of branding and strategy. I did that for 5.5 years. And then I had a vision. I had a vision to take our brand global, to come across the pond and enter the football market. Everyone told me, why would you consider doing that? It can't be done. You're an outsider and you know nothing about football. My quick response to everyone was, watch me. And so now we're 6.5 years later. We've developed Roc Nation Sports International. We're one of the top 10 football agencies in the world, and the journey continues. So that's a quick recap.
Yeah, nice. You mentioned that one of your aspirations from the age of 13 was to be president of a sports organization. You had that for 11 years at the Florida Panthers. What makes you quit and join Roc Nation? What was it about the agency? Was that a new vision?
Good question. I think, having been on the team side of the business for quite a while, the playbook became very repetitive for me. I was at the Florida Panthers for 11 years. I accomplished everything I could there. I ran the arena, I ran the club. We had great success with our overall brand. South Florida being a very competitive sports market. And then the opportunity to go to the other side of the industry on the agency side was very appealing to me. I probably would not have joined any other agency but Roc Nation.
Yeah.
And what was really appealing to me was what Roc Nation stands for, what its purpose is, its leaders, its founders, Jay-Z and Desiree Perez and Juan Perez and Jay Brown and Tata. I was just very impressed by why they were in the business, what they wanted to accomplish, and the impact that they wanted to create on artists and athletes. And I bought into the vision. And now I've been here for 11 years.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned you worked for the Yankees, and there's a really good line in one of Jay-Z's songs where he says you can make the Yankee hat more famous than a Yankee can, right? And so there is that kind of perfect intersection, I guess, that they have where they can influence sport. And I've heard you talk about this before. Like, a lot of the athletes you're working with are fans of Jay-Z, and he has such cultural relevance. I mean, he is advising the NFL on their halftime show strategy, and like a lot of the kind of resurgence of the NFL's influence in culture can be drawn back to them bringing him in as an advisor. So
listen, he stands for culture, and that was one of the reasons why Roc Nation was so appealing to me, because when you think about our competitors, they're just transactional agencies. Roc Nation is part of culture. You look at Jay, you look at his partners, you look at our clients.
Yeah.
We're probably more of a movement than we are an agency, and we're not transactional. The reason we're in the business is very different than why other agencies were started and why they can continue to be in the industry. And so that, for me, was very appealing, and that's why I joined Roc Nation. You talk about Jay's music. What I didn't realize before I joined Roc Nation is that, because of Jay's music and because of all of our artists' music, we're actually recruiting athletes all over the world, and we don't even realize it. When they turn on, music and they're listening to Jay, or they're listening to Rihanna, or listening to other artists, we're actually recruiting them during those moments. So we connect with culture, we are culture, and many of the clients that we sign want to be part of that. So for us, and for me personally, it's been an incredible journey.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they hear Roc Nation, they'll know Jay-Z is involved, but maybe you could break down, what does Roc Nation look like, and what is Roc Nation Sports International within that kind of ecosystem?
Sure. So I'll take it back to the very beginning. The reason Roc Nation was started was that Jay-Z wanted to create an agency that would guide the careers of artists, both on the stage and off, artists that look like him, artists of color, men of color, women of color. As he was coming through the music industry, in many respects, he felt that he may not have always had the opportunities that he deserved. He also probably felt that, at times, he wasn't mentored the right way. And so he wanted to make sure that, as part of his own legacy, that he positively influenced the lives of artists and now athletes in a positive way, and help them leverage their success in the moment to plan for the future. That's why Roc Nation started. That was the purpose. It was truly to help athletes and artists. So the company started 18 years ago with the sole purpose of guiding the careers of artists. And over the last 18 years, we've really diversified. Today, we've got 5 or 6 different, business verticals. We're obviously, in the artist management space. We now represent athletes. We've taken the guiding principles that made us so successful guiding the careers of artists, and now we're doing the same with athletes. We have Roc Nation Distribution, which in essence, is our label, on the music side. We've got a publishing division. We have an events division. We're in fashion. We're in spirits. So if you think about our brand, we have become a lifestyle brand, not just an agency. And all those other pieces, all those other business verticals that surround the music and sports are really complementary to us. So Diversification has been a key to our success. Connecting dots with culture has been a key to our success, but the core of our business still remains artists and athletes.
Yeah, and in terms of from a sports perspective, I assume the sports division started with American sports athletes playing basketball, American football,
Yes.
hockey, that kind of thing. And then, if I'm right, it was a relationship you had with Jerome Boateng at Bayern Munich
Yes.
that led you to take an interest in European football. And then that sort of started your curiosity, which then led to Roc Nation Sports International being formed. Is that right?
Correct. So if I take a step backwards, domestic sports was our bread and butter.
Yeah.
Again, we wanted to take the same guiding principles that we had on the artist side and bring them to sport. We wanted to help athletes of color, primarily men and women, and we wanted to help guide their careers. We wanted to make sure that they were maximizing every moment of their career to plan for their futures. And we've done that very effectively, both with National Football League players, NBA players, and Major League Baseball players. But to your point, I had the opportunity to meet Jerome, as I was part of this journey. And Jerome really connected with Jay and our culture. He wanted to develop his brand in America, and he reached out to us and said, hey, listen, while I've become a big brand in Europe, I really want to enter the US market. And there's no other agency that I really could connect with outside of Roc Nation. To be honest with you, when I first met him, I didn't even know who he was. I didn't know his background. And while I played soccer in high school, it was on the radar screen for me from a professional perspective. But, I took a leap of faith and I said, Jerome, let's work together. Let's see if we can build your brand in America. Let's create opportunities for you. But I also want you to teach me about football in Europe. And he did. And so I spent a lot of time in Europe, spent a lot of time with Bayern Munich. And through that process, I realized that there was really no 360 agency in Europe. That was reinforced when we signed Romelu Lukaku for Manchester United as well. They both kept telling me there's not an agency like Roc Nation in Europe.
Yeah.
Everyone's just focused on the transfer. Everyone's focused on the on-pitch contract, but no one's helping to build our personal brands. No one's leveraging our IP. No one is creating commercial partnerships for us. No one's helping us develop ideas and opportunities in community to give back. No one's helping us with our social and digital or our content. And we've been doing that for years in America for artists and athletes. So it was through those conversations with both Jerome and Rome that led me to say, you know what, there's an opportunity for Roc Nation. And we need to come across the pond, which we did in September of 2019, and we need to make an impact in this business, and we need to be a disruptor. And that's what we've done.
Yeah, and it sounds like as well, like a common thread across a lot of the players that you work with is they're all very proactive and they're all very driven by something beyond just making the most money. Like they all seem to have that sort of drive to be as influential as they possibly can be.
Listen, they're purpose-led. I mean, think about it. When you want to build a legacy, it's not only about your performance on the pitch or on the field or on the court or whatever sport you're involved in. It's about what are you doing off the court, off the pitch. And so you're right. A lot of our athletes, they want to give back. They want to uplift community. They want to inspire the next generation of athletes, men and women. And they see some of what athletes are doing in America. They see what LeBron's doing with his school in Akron and the lives that he's influencing and the impact that he's having, not just on the court, but off the court, in community, in his hometown. And so we have developed a client list of athletes that are as passionate about uplifting community as they are about being stars on the pitch. And we're helping them accomplish those goals. We're helping them align with different organizations so that they can give back. We're helping them start their own foundations so they can give back on a more consistent basis. And all of that will help them create a legacy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and is it always that way around? Do they have that drive when you sign them, or is it sometimes something that you help them unlock and maybe they feel it, but they haven't actually acted on it yet?
Great question. I think innately they have it inside of them, but we got to pull it out of them. A lot of athletes and artists, celebrities, when they give, they don't want to. They don't want people to know they're giving. They don't want the recognition. One of the things that I tell our clients all the time is that the recognition is good. Why is it good? Because if you put your name on it and other artists and athletes see what you're doing, you're going to inspire them to give. Whether it's DJ Khaled in South Florida, who started the We the Best Foundation, whether it's Siya Kolisi, who started the Kolisi Foundation in South Africa, or now Cheslin Kolbe in South Africa, who started the Kolbe Foundation. It's important that they put their name on it, that they're recognized for the good that they're doing, because they will inspire other artists and celebrities and athletes to do the same. So we got to pull it out of them, and we got to make sure that the athletes are comfortable in that space and talking about the good things that they're doing.
Yeah, talking of that comfort, I guess that is where there maybe is like a slight cultural difference, right? Because the British in particular, like, really don't like to blow their own trumpet, to speak up about the stuff that they're doing that's good.
There's no question. Culturally, and you bring up a great point because I noticed that when I first came over, from America, that many of the athletes that I interfaced with were very humble, didn't want recognition for the good things that they were doing specifically in the community. Don't mind the recognition when it comes to sport and their achievements, but when it comes to things off the pitch, they were a little bit more conservative. And so we at Roc Nation have to give them the confidence, that they can be outspoken and that they can use their name and that getting recognition for the good things they're doing in community will just inspire people and motivate people to do the same. And so we've had to kind of recondition the thinking because from a cultural standpoint, they just never felt comfortable.
Yeah.
Whether it's here in the UK, whether it's in Italy, whether it's in South Africa, or now in Brazil where we're doing business, I found that to be a common thread through all of those markets. But you know what? We're making a lot of progress. And our athletes are beginning to understand what their true purpose is and that they do need to put their names out there on these very, very important initiatives to continue to uplift community.
Yeah. Is there a fear sometimes with athletes that if they go and speak about stuff outside of the sport, that's going to be almost used as a stick to beat them with if their performance drops off? Like an example that comes to mind, who isn't a Roc Nation athlete, I don't think, is Marcus Rashford, right? Like, he did so much good for the communities that he was within, petitioning against the government for free school meals for children, like all stuff that you could do nothing but applaud, right? But then that was still almost seen as like, oh, this has distracted him from playing football for Man United and almost used against him in some ways.
Listen, Marcus was part of Roc Nation. He's part of our alumni. But what I would say to that is this. It's easy for people to criticize when things aren't going well. Whatever hasn't happened for Marcus Rashford on the pitch has absolutely nothing to do with the work that he did off the pitch. He's an easy target, right?
Yeah.
It's an easy excuse to say his in-community work, his endorsements, negatively influence his performance. You know what? That's nonsense.
Yeah.
Okay. You got to look at those two things separately, right? Again, and Marcus has not been part of Roc Nation for quite some time, so I really don't know what's happened. I do believe that he's extraordinarily talented and he will get back to his old form. But at the end of the day, his perceived decline has absolutely nothing to do with the good work that he has done. I mean, listen, I use LeBron James as a great example. He's the first billionaire athlete, current athlete of all time. He's a billionaire and he's still playing 21 years later. He's had endorsements, he's had investments, he's done all kind of great things off the court. And that's separate from what he does on the court. And he's the greatest basketball player of all time. But there have been moments where maybe he didn't reach expectations. And during those moments, are you going to blame the things that he's doing off the court? Absolutely not.
I completely agree with you. Maybe it's more prevalent in Europe, but that seems to be a narrative that the media like to push, and I feel like it maybe discourages athletes because they see something like that happen, and then that makes them maybe slightly more.
But understand the core
reserved.
Understand the core of the situation here. American athletes, they grow up in a culture where star power is part of sport. Look at the NBA, look at the National Football League, look at Major League Baseball. I often use the NBA as an example. The NBA is a star-driven league. Their success is based on the marketability of their star players. That's why when players move from team to team, fans change their allegiance.
Yeah.
Because it's more about the name on the back than on the front of the jersey. Here in Europe, it's the opposite. It's all about team. It's all about the club. It's all about your country. And so when an athlete steps out of that and says, you know what, I want to build my brand. I want to leverage my IP. I want to align with commercial partners. I want to be an entrepreneur. It's frowned upon. So it's a cultural issue. And that's why the media will say, well, he's distracted. He did too many endorsements. He's focused too much on community. Again, it's nonsense.
Yeah.
And we got to break through that from a cultural perspective. I remember when I first met Siya Kolisi, the captain of the Springboks in South Africa. After 2019, we started working together, and he had ambitions, right, to commercialize his brand, to align with commercial partners, to tell his story globally. But there was a little hesitation culturally. Should I be doing this? Should I stand out in front? Should I put a spotlight on me? And I kept telling him, Siya, when you put a spotlight on yourself, you're putting a spotlight on your country, on your club, and on the Springboks. It's all positive. But you've been raised in a culture where, that's not the norm. It's the exception. And we need to make it more the norm than the exception. And I used to use LeBron James as an example. I used to use the late and great Kobe Bryant as an example. I used to use Kevin Durant, who was a client of Roc Nation Sports, as an example. And I think the light went on for him, and he became more comfortable putting himself out there, commercializing himself. He started his foundation. He's got incredible relationships, with brands around the world. And we were educating the market on the fact that you can do both. You can still be a very dedicated athlete and one of the best in the world and still do those other things off the pitch.
For sure. And I think that's where this gets even more interesting from a cultural perspective, because rugby is, if that's the culture in Europe generally, like that's the culture times 10 when it comes to
100%.
rugby,
It's
right?
worse in rugby.
Mhm.
It's worse in rugby. And that's a battle that we fight with all of our clients. We've got some of the most high-profile players in world rugby. When you think about Siya Kolisi and Cheslin Colby and Marcus Smith and Ali Lawrence and Ellis Genge and the list goes on. And that's a constant conversation we have with them. But see, the athletes that we bring into Roc Nation that we sign are also ready to engage in those activities.
Yeah.
They already come to Roc Nation understanding that if I join a firm like Roc Nation, those are things I need to take advantage of. I need to use their subject matter experts and their expertise to build my brand, to uplift communities, to create commercial partnerships, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been really fun working with rugby players and having them become disruptive within the culture of rugby.
Yeah, you mentioned Ellis Genge, who I think is a really good example of that. Like, I remember when the Six Nations, like, behind the scenes show came out on Netflix, he was one of the ones really, like, sort of championing it and saying, like, we need to start building up the personalities of the athletes. And I think even before he joined Roc Nation, I was actually listening on a podcast on the way in on Good, the Bad, and the Rugby from about 2.5 years ago, where Ellis is the guest and then you come on as a guest.
That's where I met him
And
the first time.
I was going to ask, like, it felt like you were like the perfect match and you kind of just got put together in this podcast, because he was basically saying everything that you then went on to say before you joined the conversation.
So to your point, I met him on that podcast, and afterwards I called him, and he was with another agency, and I completely respected that. And I said, I just want to become your friend because I loved some of the things that you said. And so we would share some moments together. We'd have lunch and we'd have dinner, and ultimately he made a decision to come to Roc Nation. He's an incredible person. But I remember my first real sit down with him one-on-one. And I asked him, I said, you know what? You've got a very non-traditional story from a rugby perspective, growing up in Bristol, the hardships that you went through, some of the challenges that you went through. Why haven't you ever told that story? He was actually scared to tell the story. He wasn't sure how rugby would receive the story or how they would respond. And I think when he joined Roc Nation, we gave him the confidence that he could tell that story, and that he could tell it with conviction and passion, and that we would always have his back no matter what happened. And as you know, he's done quite a few interviews over the last couple of years. And I think more and more people understand his story and understand, based on that story, why he is who he is today. He's an incredible person. He's a great leader. He's a great husband. He's a great father. And again, when you talk about giving back to community, he just started the Genschmite. And so now he's giving back to Bristol. He wants to make a difference. He wants to create impact. He wants to inspire, young boys and girls in his community, starting to do that, through his fun, which is absolutely amazing. This man has come so far since he joined Roc Nation. I'm so proud of him and his family and the things that he's doing and the fact that he's now very comfortable being outspoken.
Mhm. You talk about kind of like, there was just a very natural alignment, I guess, with the way that he looked at the world and the way that he wanted to change rugby and the way that you were coming in with a very fresh approach rather than kind of being staunched in the traditions of the game. Maybe you can tell listeners the story of how you initially got into rugby.
Sure, sure. Um, as an American, growing up, rugby was not really relevant to me. In America, some of the universities on the collegiate level play rugby, but from a professional perspective, it's not a sport that has much relevancy, because of the clutter of American sports with Major League Baseball, the National Football League, the NHL, the NBA. So when I came over across the pond in September 2019, as the story goes, that was the year that England played the Springboks in the finals of the World Cup in Japan. And I was working out at my gym on James Street. And while I was working out, I would see a lot of people gathering around the TV, at the front of the gym. And I asked somebody, "What are you watching?" And they said, "Oh, we're watching the World Cup in Japan." I said, "What World Cup?" And they said, "The Rugby World Cup. England is about to get into the finals." So all of a sudden it became topical for me. And then the day of the final, I was in a Sprinter van with one of the owners of Roc Nation, and we were driving to support Kevin De Bruyne in Manchester and to go see one of his matches. And the only thing on TV that morning was the final from Japan. And as the match unfolded, unfortunately for England, they didn't perform at their best. I remember at the very end, the captain of the Springboks, and I had never watched a rugby match before. I never even touched the ball. I knew nothing about the sport. But I remember, Siya Kolisi lifting the Rev Ellis trophy and giving an incredibly passionate speech about what it meant to his nation to be in that position, what it meant to win the World Cup, and the fact that when you work together, you can accomplish anything. I was so taken with his words that I called a contact of mine in South Africa and I said, "Listen, this may sound crazy, but I got to speak to Siya. I need to introduce myself to Siya Kolisi and tell him how impressed I was with his speech and that we need to use Siya to inspire people all over the world. That Sia's got such an incredible story." And so within 48 hours, I was on the phone with Siya Kolisi, which was shocking to me because obviously he became a national hero coming out of that World Cup in 2019. But he made the time for me. We spoke for about 10 minutes and I said, "Siya, listen, you don't know who I am. I'm with Roc Nation Sports International, a division of Roc Nation Sports. Our company is owned by Jay-Z. And I just listened, to your very passionate speech following your victory in Japan. Can we get together? Because I think I can help you. And I want to amplify your story around the world. And I want to inspire people all over the world." Within 2 weeks, he was here in London. He was coming up here as a guest of Liverpool, post World Cup. He sat in our office for 6 hours. And all we talked about was his journey, his childhood, the challenges, the obstacles, and how he became captain of the mighty Springboks. And after those 6 hours, I said, "Siya, you need to join Roc Nation. This is your moment. This is your time." And we were very, very fortunate to sign him. That started the journey in rugby. Siya Kolisi really got us into this business. He also introduced us to other players. And through that, not only did I what was I blessed to have the opportunity to work with Siya? But I fell in love with the sport. I fell in love with its players. I fell in love with, the physicality, um, the nature of the game, every element of the game.
Mhm.
And that's why we're still in rugby today. But it started right after the World Cup.
Yeah. So, I mean, taking like going all the way back to your kind of sports executive days as president of Florida Panthers, like knowing nothing about rugby, what are the elements that with completely fresh eyes you would be advising, whether it's the Springboks, whether it's a club rugby team or a league? What is it that you think needs to happen in rugby to help those players?
So there are a couple of things, but I think if you get at the real core, and I've gone on record, discussing this.
Yeah.
Um, Rugby has a lot of traditionalists, and it hasn't been a professional sport, for a long time, relatively speaking. I think, those that really run the sport at every level need to understand that rugby, especially professional rugby, is entertainment. And that in order to reach a broader audience, a more diversified audience, and in order to become commercially viable, they need to see themselves as entertainment. They also need to reach out, again, to a broader audience. With all due respect, when I go to a England match, it's very homogeneous. There's no diversification in the stands. It's middle-aged white men. When I go down to South Africa, it's completely different now. That's why people refer to South Africa rugby Rainbow Nation, because you go into the stands, it's complete diversity now. Men, women, families, black, white. It's incredible, absolutely incredible. So rugby needs to look at itself a little bit differently. And again, they need to look at it themselves as true entertainment. The second thing that rugby needs to do, and these are basic elements,
Yeah.
is they need to understand that their players are their number one asset. And by storytelling around their players, developing star power, and shining a light on those players, it's great for club rugby. It's great for international rugby. It's great for the sport because young kids want to follow stars.
Yeah.
Young kids want to be like stars. And we need to turn these players into heroes. And so rugby hasn't always felt comfortable doing that. There's a handful of players that people know within World Rugby, but they're definitely not global icons.
Yeah.
And they should be. They absolutely should be. So, number one, entertainment. You're not just sport, you're entertainment. And so your strategy for the live event experience and how you communicate your sport needs to take that into consideration. And then number two, you need to develop star power out of your players, storytell around them, and allow the lights to be shined on them because it's good for everybody. Those are the two key things that rugby must consider moving forward.
Mhm. And in terms of letting that star emerge, how much of that is down to the player to just leverage social media versus how much of it is on the rights holder to say, we're going to give you the access and the platform to build your profile?
Combination. I mean, you can't build a player's profile unless they're comfortable doing it.
Yeah.
So you've got to go after the players that feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, you look at our roster. Every one of our players is comfortable with the light being shined on them for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Right? And then the rights holders need to exploit that. They need to tell those stories. Right? When I'm watching a rugby match, okay, unlike watching sports in America, it's very rare that the announcers go into depth on a player or talk about that player's journey or comment about that player as it relates to something off the field. Doesn't exist. When you watch American sports, whether it's baseball, football or basketball, the announcers are not just calling the game. They're storytelling around the game, around the teams, and around the players. And so broadcasters need to do a better job with that.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, the best example in rugby is Alona Mayer, right? Like, who's just gone and told her story. She's been pushing out TikTok since Tokyo 2020. Obviously, it really took off for her around the Paris Games, and she's now the most followed rugby player
Yes.
in the world.
But you know what? She decided she was going to be disruptive, and she decided she was going to do it her way. And I commend her for doing that. And it's amazing. And that can be used as a blueprint, right? Siya Kolisi also can be used as a blueprint. He's arguably the most high-profile rugby player in the world today. But he didn't hold back from telling his story. He puts himself out there.
Yeah.
And he's doing all the right things to lay the foundation for future players coming through to feel comfortable doing the same.
To the point around the broadcasters, I guess like one area where rugby in the UK struggles is a lot of it's behind pay TV walls, right? So you don't see it unless you're paying a subscription to TNT, or I think most of it's on TNT, or maybe Sky Sports for some of it. But the Six Nations is really the only time you get visibility into rugby in the UK, unless you're a pay TV subscriber. So that's why there seems to be this like huge discrepancy between people that watch international rugby versus club.
Well, the access is important, to your point. I mean, we got to make sure that rugby is more accessible. But, you know, you bring up an interesting point between club and international rugby. You know, it seems to me that club rugby is just a feeder system for international,
Yeah.
and that shouldn't be, right? We've got to boost, the club profile. You've got so many great players playing on the club level, and those club brands are strong, and they should be on equal footing, with international. Um, and scheduling, has to support that relationship as well, right? You think about football. During international breaks, club football shuts down. During rugby, that's not the case. The clubs continue to play. And in many cases, some of those clubs go from putting their eighth team on the field to their B team. And that hurts their brand. And that value proposition isn't good for the season ticket holder or the supporter. So there's a lot that needs to be changed.
Yeah.
But we got to get those stakeholders to the table. And those stakeholders have to be made uncomfortable, because only through that process are you going to be able to make the decisions that will enhance the game. One of the great leaders in sport today is Adam Silver of the National Basketball Association. Why? Every year he looks at the game and he comes up with something new and innovative to keep it fresh, to keep it engaged, so that it further connects with not only fans in America, but around the world. Every sport should be doing the same thing, not staying in their comfort zone or just following tradition. Sometimes you got to break out of tradition. You got to be disruptive, because fans are always looking for the next big thing. What's the next big change? And so the NBA has gotten it right. Other leagues need to look at the NBA, take that as a blueprint for success, and begin executing it.
So how does that specifically fit into your role when you're advising, whether it's Siya Kolisi, whether it's Ellis Gensch? Like, do you get to have much of an impact or say on kind of speaking to the clubs that they're representing?
So we have conversations all the time. I mean, we have a great relationship with all the clubs. Obviously, these are players under contract. And so we're sharing our wisdom, we're sharing our suggestions. We do a lot of consulting work, by the way, outside of our player representation. We consult for leagues and venues and clubs and governing bodies all over the world. And through that process, we're helping them better understand the value of star power, the value of storytelling around their players, and then storytelling around their brands as well. And so, yeah, we have those conversations. There are some clubs, some governing bodies that are more open to the conversation. And then there are some that say, you know what, this is the way we've always done it. And so we're not ready to shift or to change. And that's okay as well. But we are making an impact, both through, one-on-one conversations and the consulting services that we provide. And we will continue to do so.
Yeah. And I guess the other side of it, like, is one part of it so you can influence the rights holders, particularly if you can consult with them. The other part of this is if you're working with rugby players, I'm assuming you're opening doors to brands that traditionally haven't maybe even considered rugby, the same way that you weren't particularly familiar with it until you saw that interview after the World Cup final. I would assume just through where you've been having the volume of your conversations, you have a lot more kind of contacts within American brands and brands that are trying to sort of sit on the edge of culture which haven't traditionally been the ones that sponsor rugby?
Sure. But for us, on the commercial side, because that's a big part of what we do,
Yeah.
it's about education, right? So, we work with a lot of brands that are traditional. Maybe they've supported rugby, on the international level or a club. Maybe not so much with an individual athlete. Same thing on the football side. But one of the things that we're really proud of is we are consistently bringing new brands, into sport. We've done it in America. We're doing it in Europe. Part of it is educating them on the power of influencer marketing, the power of sport and entertainment as a marketing platform. And we're making great progress in there. And so when we bring a brand into a sport for the very first time, it's a big win for us. It's a big win for the sport. It's a big win for our client. So um, we are educating while we're selling. And, we're about to launch what we call the Champions of Marketing series, where we are going to invite, brands, C-level executives from those brands that may never have used rugby or football as a marketing platform, or athletes as part of influencer marketing. And we're going to use this series as a way to educate them on how they can break through as a brand, how they can increase their market share, whether it's regionally, nationally, or globally, through sports and through entertainment and through selected athletes. And so as we go through that process, we think we'll also be able to create new opportunities for the clients that are part of Roc Nation.
I guess the other part to the brand conversation is just like, how do you think about selecting the brands that your athletes work with? Because there's an element of, I can put money on the table and you become an ambassador of my brand. But then there's also, particularly given the kind of purpose-driven nature that a lot of these athletes have, sometimes like the highest bidder isn't the one that they necessarily want to align with. Sometimes there's a brand that can't give them much money on the table, but has like a real strong cultural influence that actually allows the athlete into other conversations
Sure.
where they can make.
I would tell you that it's a little bit different between rugby and football. But when I look at this from a holistic perspective, there's an overused word that I think guides us, and that's authenticity, right? People know when it's pay for play. The athletes that come to Roc Nation, they want authentic relationships. And so the first thing we do when we onboard an athlete is we sit down and we say, what are the brands that are part of your life? What are the brands that you admire? What are the brands that you would like to work with? Because that has to create the foundation for our outreach, right? It's not about who's going to write the biggest check. I mean, with all due respect, Vinicius Jr., who was arguably the most marketable male athlete in the world, his life is not going to change based on an endorsement deal, right? That's not why he's doing it. So it's got to be authentic to Vinny. It's got to be a brand that Vinny respects. That relationship has to do something for Vinny, whether it's expanding into a new market, making him more relevant in America or globally. But at the foundation of that relationship has to be authenticity. Same thing with the rugby players, whether it's Ellis Kench or Marcus Smith or Siya Kolisi or Cheslin Colby. They're not just going to do a deal for the income. Those days are over. Those athletes want to align with brands that are either part of their life, brands that really they admire, or brands that are aligned with them from a story perspective. Give you a great example on the rugby side.
Yep.
Investec, big financial
Yep.
company, is a major partner of Cheslin Colby's. And I remember the first meeting I had with Investec, and I went through a needs analysis. And I asked them to tell us about their journey. And they said, you know what? When we entered the South African market, we were the underdogs. There were so many competitors that pre-existed us. No one thought we could make it. I said, that's really interesting because we have an athlete that people said the same thing about, Cheslin Colby. They all said that he wasn't going to make it for various reasons. And so your stories really align. You were both the underdogs in South Africa. Cheslin was an underdog rugby player, and you were an underdog financial institution trying to break through. I think there's great synergy there. And if we tell a story right, we can make a great impact. That served as the foundation for that relationship. And that relationship now has been ongoing, for the last couple of years. Investec recently extended it. But that's the process that we go through. That authenticity from a storytelling perspective has to be at the core
Yeah.
of any commercial partnership that we do.
Yeah, it's a great example. In terms of like brands that are in their lives as well, I feel like maybe Maro Itoje, when he was at Roc Nation, did a few deals that were not traditional rugby deals in terms of like I want to say Louis Vuitton, but it might not have been. It might have been another fashion brand he partnered with.
So he did something with Ralph
Ralph Lauren.
And when you think about Maro and you think about his personality and the fashion brands that, he's engaged with, that was a good fit for him. With Maro, when we started working with Maro, and at the very beginning of our journey with him, it was coming off of, the World Cup in 2019.
Yeah.
His profile was enormous, not only here in the UK, but globally. We aligned him with brands that he was very passionate about, brands that were part of his life. And that's what guided us, but also brands that were within categories that he had interest. Maro's an extraordinary guy. I mean, he's got a lot of interests. He loves art. He loves design. He loves the kitchen, right? And so all of that lifestyle of Maro's guided us from a commercial perspective in terms of what are the brands that made sense for him. Because again, like the other athletes we work with, whether it's football or rugby, authenticity was really important to him. He didn't need to do a deal. So I think Maro is a great example. Yeah, he had a lot of fun with these partners, but most importantly, they were authentic to who he is and what he represents.
Yeah, it's one thing, I guess, to say, speak to an athlete, find out what brands are in their life. Is another thing to be able to then go and have meaningful conversations with those brands, right? Like, is that an advantage of Roc Nation and the doors you can unlock? Because I would assume some of those brands, like Ralph Lauren, for example, wouldn't necessarily be interested in a rugby ambassadorship. Like, the reason that it makes sense for them is Roc Nation's the one approaching them, and they know that Roc Nation's already done that with multiple other athletes in terms of creating those authentic partnerships.
It's true, but remember, when we go to market, we're not saying Maro Itoje, the rugby player, Vinicius Jr., the footballer. It's Maro Itoje, the man. It's Vinicius Jr., the man. What do they stand for? What's their purpose? What are their interests? That's what opens up the doors.
Yeah.
Okay, Maro is not just a rugby player. Vinicius Jr. is not just a football player. When I pitch Vinny, I pitch more about what he means and represents off the pitch than what he represents on. Yes, the fact that he's the best player in the world opens up a door. But this man's an entrepreneur. He's a philanthropist. The good work he's doing in Brazil is second to none. The way he stands up for racism, right? He's purpose-led. And that's what's going to engage a brand and make a brand interested in having the conversation. The same thing with Maro Itoje. The same thing with any of our athletes. So yes, the Roc Nation brand opens up doors. Yes, our network of contacts is enormous. And yes, because we're both in music and sport, our contacts, our Rolodex is significant. But it's the way we tell the story. I often tell people that if you really think about the core of our business, right? We're storytellers. That's what we do. Whether we're trying to move a player from one team to the next, whether it's a commercial partnership, whether it's an entrepreneurial opportunity, at the end of the day, we got to tell the story. And if we tell the story right, and that story aligns with a commercial brand, we're going to close the deal. And if it doesn't, we're not. It's simple.
Yeah. And I feel like, I don't know if we've actually discussed it in here or whether it's one of the many podcasts I listen to on the way here, but it feels like that narrative and that storytelling is something you're very clear on with the players. When you first sit down with them, it's like, where do you want to be in 5 years? What inspires you? What motivates you? And you like really try to get as many of those kind of like key drivers out of them as
I'll tell
possible.
you got to. So the last 30 days, I've been in a lot of recruiting meetings. It's a very exciting time for us, by the way, especially on the football side. We've got some top players around the world that have decided to join Roc Nation. And I started every meeting before I went into our formal PowerPoint presentation with one question. What's your dream? What are your goals and objectives? What do you want to achieve? And what do you want out of your representation? Those are the questions I ask. Because I want to understand what the dreams are. I want to understand what the goals and objectives are. right? I already know a little bit about the story. But once I get those answers, I'm already thinking about the opportunities that we can create. Then the presentation becomes easy. I was recently in a pitch meeting, with a young player's family, and I asked those questions. And they gave me some answers, about family and transparency and honesty. And, they talked about the goals and objectives, of their son. And it was interesting because once we started going through the PowerPoint presentation, it was as if I'd already spoken to the family. It immediately resonated. And so as I tell the story now, I tell people we had them from the word hello.
Okay.
Because once we understood what was important to them, those same things are important to us at the very core of who Roc Nation is. And so the storytelling is critical, but you got to understand what that story is and then ultimately how to leverage the story to create the opportunities.
Yeah, you mentioned a few players coming on board. I guess a good way to finish the episode is to ask you what your dream is, because you're obviously asking it to a lot of players, but I'm curious, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners are curious, like, what's your dream?
My dream has changed throughout my career. As I told you back, when I was 13 years old, my dream, was to be in this industry. And then ultimately my dream was to be one of the youngest CEOs in the big professional sport leagues in America. And I achieved that dream at a very young age. As I sit here today and you ask me what my dream is, it's very simple. I want to impact lives. That's all I care about right now. I want to impact the lives of my employees. I want to impact the lives of our clients. And I want to leave a legacy behind where people, when they think about me, know that I made them better, that I helped them achieve their goals and objectives, that I helped make dreams become a reality. I'm not in this business for any other reason right now. My family is in South Florida. I'm sitting here in the UK. There's a big distance there. I'm making this sacrifice, again, for one reason, to impact lives. That's my dream. And so if I can accomplish that, then I'm living my dream. And since I've been here, almost 6 years now, we've impacted lives. We've changed lives. We've made lives better, not just with our clients, but with our employees. And so I'm going to continue to live that dream. I'm going to continue to impact lives as long as I decide to work.
Yeah.
And I still have a lot in front of me.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing that with us. And I'm really excited to see where this goes next.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Pundit podcast. I'll include more info about the guest and the topics covered in the show notes. And you can also find my LinkedIn profile if you'd like to connect and let me know what you thought. Visit sportspundit.co to find previous editions of the podcast, access the newsletter, and to sign up for our WhatsApp group and see upcoming social events in cities around the world. See you again soon.